I am so excited to introduce you to Maura Silverman. She is the executive director at the National Aphasia Association. She brings with her a wealth of knowledge and experience, and she is the number one cheerleader for individuals with aphasia and their families. Help me welcome Maura. Good morning, Maura. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. As we talked about, we've known each other for a long time, but I think this is the first time we've been able to be face to face.
I think it's wonderful. So, everybody, I am so excited to introduce you to Maura Silverman. It is my pleasure to have you on the show and to talk about your role as executive director at the National Aphasia Association.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I've been a big fan of your work and everything you've been doing, and this opportunity certainly has allowed me to be out there and learn about everything that's going on in the community. And you should be very proud of the work that you're
I
doing.
appreciate that very much. So, let's start off by talking about
Sure.
aphasia awareness. Can you tell us a little bit about that initiative?
I've worked in the arena of aphasia for many, many, many years. We take a responsibility to share with the larger community what aphasia is. And more importantly, I think what aphasia is not,
Mm.
really allowing people to see the competency, the roles that we have to, and responsibilities to give access to people with aphasia, and how we can better support communicative partners, care partners, and families living with and impacted by aphasia. It's really acknowledging the fact that people with aphasia have a voice. They may struggle with theirs, they may need support for theirs, but if we can make it louder and if we can allow the larger community to accept the authenticity of that voice, then we gain confidence for those people with aphasia to be out there and sharing their passions and really promoting that life participation. The National Aphasia Association is a nonprofit organization, and the reason why it's been around 37 years and is continuing the dream of Dr. Martha Sarno is that people have to look at what the community can gain from a program that if you have aphasia or somebody's diagnosed with aphasia, you have a beacon, you have somewhere to go, and you have somewhere to find out about programs like yours and programs across the country. How else would you know about them?
That's right.
So we want to be that beacon. We want to help shine the light on all the programs that are across the country.
I
Thanks.
feel like the NAA, National Aphasia Association, is really trying to get into the community and really trying to bring that. I think you use the word grassroots awareness because that's
Yes.
so many of the clients that I work with folks across the country in lots of different
Yeah.
states, and many of them don't know of any programs where they live, or that their friends and neighbors didn't know the word aphasia before they had it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that one of the commitments that I made when I took the position is that I wanted to move away from a very transactional approach to gaining information. So if you go to the bank and you put a deposit slip and they give you a receipt and you walk away, what we don't want is to people to come to the NAA and say, my husband had a stroke and I don't have insurance and I'm looking for programs, and I go, here are a list of programs that don't take insurance, and then spit that out. That's very transactional. So we've made a commitment to, really it aligns with my values and who I am as a person, as a speech pathologist, to get to know the family a little bit. What do you need? And instead of just providing them with our provider link, which is great,
Mhm.
but it might be missing somebody. It might be missing a program or a resource that's available in their area, or maybe they're not sure what to search for. So this allows us to get to know them a little bit, make it more interactional and based on relationships, and establish that and help them find what they need.
And you touched on a really important word, relationships. That's what the
Relationship.
folks I work with, a lot of folks with chronic aphasia, as I know you did at Triangle Aphasia Project. and they find that they don't have relationships. They're getting isolated. They're isolated for various reasons, but aphasia can be very isolating. So it's about building relationships and connections and knowing where you can go for information.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love your
Very,
initiatives. I love the
thank you.
hands-on component with the NAA now. It's easier to access information on the website. I've noticed that recently too. So happy to see those are all great things. Can you tell us a little bit, Maura, about how you came to have this passion for aphasia? You've been a speech pathologist for a good many years. Did you always
Mhm.
think you were going to go into aphasia?
Yeah, actually it did. I had started out thinking I was going to be in psychology. I really knew I wanted to help people. My mother was a nurse, and when I observed a speech pathologist, I was probably in my second year in college, and she was working with little kids, and I'm like, that's fun, I'd be good at that. But then this gentleman came in, and he was a businessman in our area, and you could just tell that he was so competent, that he knew everything that he knew before his stroke. And she asked him to a question, and the struggle, I felt it like empathetically and just in my heart that this is what I wanted to do. So I was always kind of directed in adult neurogenics. Certainly did other things in the beginning, but as soon as I had the opportunity to start to visit things like the Aphasia Institute in Canada, or I worked at Shepherd Center in Atlanta, and as I had these experiences with nonprofits and different organizations, I thought, there really should be something for people with aphasia that goes beyond the traditional medical model. And so I was really excited about transitioning from what was good jobs. I mean, excellent hospital along the whole continuum of care to living my dream. And it was to start the Triangle Aphasia Project in 2003. And so it's 21, I'll be 22 years old now, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And what was a small grassroots in my living room with myself, my husband, a social worker, a speech pathologist, and a family member grew into, this like nationwide kind of support. And it was great because it reached out to those people, but it serves North Carolina. That is where its home is. And so I loved every aspect of it. It worked with people with aphasia, their families, and the community. But then in 2009, my real purpose was identified when my mom suffered a massive left hemisphere bleed, ended up with non-fluent aphasia and right hemipresis. And while initially I felt it was the great cosmic irony and very unfair, it became the greatest gift, her selfless gift to teach me what families needed when somebody has aphasia. It certainly impacted our work at TAP, but it also had me wanting to connect more. So when I was one of the founding members of Aphasia Access and wanted to connect with more and more providers of this life participation approach. So that's when in last year, in 2023, I was offered the opportunity to interview for the position for the executive director of the NAA. And I feel like I lost my mom in 2020, and I feel like she just was just shining down this yellow brick road of like, get there. This is where you need to be. And it's really, it's the greatest honor, because I get to meet people like you and other people that are working on the same kind of dream.
Can we touch on a little bit more, pardon me, about families and what they need?
Yeah, I think that my experience, even as a professional, my sister's also a speech
Oh,
pathologist,
that's
so we're yeah, so we ended up being in the hospital, getting I think the same information that other families get, but with that knowledge that we knew a little bit of what to expect. And it was the traditional binder, here's all the information on home care. Here's all the information on this. Here's some home exercises. And I thought, wow, we're really missing the boat here. People didn't know her. And so the therapy was very cookbook if we didn't intervene. And so I think one of the first things my sister and I did was put a big poster above her bed that said, she likes to be called Joni. Joni has 10 grandchildren. She is a retired nurse. She loves this, this, and that. And when people came in and gained that connection with her, I think, everything kind of changed. What I still think we need, and that's even up to the time of my mom's passing, was still a challenge, was to keep her connected with her friends and her social. She was so actively involved in so many things when she retired, volunteering and such, that I was kind of the one woman encourager, along with my family, to get her to do these things. But there was still a lot of challenge of her friends accepting that, and knowing how to communicate with her was just really important. So one of the initiatives at the NAA that I want to bring is, how do we educate families not on what aphasia is, but also how to communicate with that individual? What are the supports that they need, and to keep it growing as they change and expand their horizon. So
And that is a passion of mine as well. I actually just launched a community, and it's just founding members right now, but we have folks with aphasia and then spouses. And it was
yeah.
fascinating hearing them, the questions that they were asking each other, because they all came from a very different place, but
Mm-hmm.
they were able to connect and communicate. And you could just see this overflowing empathy that, even though I've worked with many of these families for a long time, it took it to the next level. And it
Yeah.
really helped them feel seen and heard and understood.
Yeah.
It,
I mean, we can try to understand as a
I
caregiver, as a
try.
speech pathologist, but we don't have aphasia. And so when you meet somebody else with aphasia or who is walking that journey, and the community piece is just huge, because people don't have to be reintegrated into their community if we don't disengage them in the first
I love
place.
that.
You
Yes.
know,
Great point.
let's get rid of the re, you
Yeah.
know, let's
Yeah.
just
Ooh,
keep
I
them
like that. You
going.
might need to write that down. Get rid of the re. We're not
Yeah.
going to reintegrate.
I've given many talks on getting rid of the re.
Yeah, we want to keep it. We want to keep them going. And I think that's where speech pathologists, through the whole continuum of care, could really start to share that message with family. Like, if you see this happening,
Absolutely.
you need to reach out, or you need to do this, or you need to connect in this way. Almost give them a little more of a roadmap.
Well, and also to give them permission that they aren't the therapist. One of the programs I came up with called communication support teams is an opportunity for us to say, you know what, we know intensity works. We know about neuroplasticity. We know that repetition and engagement in salient activities is helpful. We know that the more you get, the better, which is why ICAPs work. But most people are either geographically or financially have inaccessibility to these types of programs. So why not use all those people that came to your door and said, here, I brought you Boston Market. I thought you might need a pie or whatever. These people want to help. We need to help give them jobs to do, and to really engage them in supporting their communication in really functional ways. And they're very powerful. So yeah, community is huge. So glad you're doing that.
It's, yeah, just trying to meet the needs. And so many of the folks are years past the onset of aphasia, and
Sure.
they probably aren't even seeing their neurologist anymore. If they're not connected to social work, they may not have a support group. But even initiating getting them online with, like, one of the groups through the NAA, one of the monthly groups, or through virtual connections, sometimes that's a barrier I have to help them overcome just to start connecting. But what if we could get them started sooner, when they're
Exactly.
in home health, maybe in home health or in outpatient, getting them aware of these other things, so that it's not fresh information 2 years after their stroke.
Absolutely. One of the things that we, I'm not sure my mom loved the idea that two of her daughters were speech pathologists, but one of the things we did right while she was in the hospital was we had at the time it was called Care Pages. They don't have that anymore. Caring Bridge is still available. It's the same kind of thing. Or a Facebook group where it was something that was specific about her recovery. And instead of us posting about what she was doing, we really empowered her to tell her story and share. So we'd post a picture of her walking and I'd say, now what did you do today in PT? And she said, 100. And I was said, so, and I'd write down 100. And I said, did you walk 100 feet? Yes. I'm like, let's write that in a sentence. And then she'd type that sentence in and then we'd post it. And it was like this ownership and of her, recovery and her rehabilitation. And so I think it became more habilitation than rehabilitation.
I love that. I have a couple of clients that post every day on social media
Yeah.
something that they're working on or something they're doing speech wise, speaking in sentences instead of single words. And it's highly motivating for them. And
Yeah, we had 4 words on our wall at TAP that I ordered when we first got a building and moved out of my car. And that was hope, purpose. Now I'm going to forget what the other ones are, but hope and purpose being like you need a reason to get up. And I think that's really key is for people to understand that, that it gives them some ownership of it.
absolutely. What message would you want to give to families that are new in the hospital and their loved one has aphasia? What would you want them to know or understand at that phase?
Yeah. I'm brought to a quote that my best friend her daughter has on her vision board, and it says, your now is not your forever. And it is such a scary, scary time. And you're hearing maybe the word aphasia for the very first time. I would want them to know they're not alone, but I would also allow them to know that right now is not what it's always going to be like. That right now the struggle is real and you're jumping in and fixing these things. But as a person improves, they're going to gain more of those independence. And we can teach you how to be a support person along that. I would also really emphasize the need to support any independence and ensure access. There is so much that I learned with my mom's journey that reflected just ignorance on the part of our healthcare community. Doctors looking at me when my mother was sitting right next to me saying, how's she doing? She's right here. I think that, yes, we need to train healthcare providers to communicate with people with aphasia, but we also need people to understand that the person with aphasia has rights and they should be able to sign for their own things and that they should have the right to have a communicative partner if they
Mhm.
need that might be their support versus a hearing aid or a walker, something like that. So I would say you're not alone and ensure that that person is getting respect and access.
I call it aphasia inclusion. I do a
Yes.
thing with the holidays about, how are we going to include how are you going to include as a family your person with aphasia into the holidays so they're not sitting alone or in another room disconnected from people.
Yes.
And just like you said, we got to start in the hospital and get this continuum of care.
I watch my boys who are now young men, they grew up with my mom having aphasia
Mhm.
basically since it was in 2003 and she passed in 2020. And I watch them with other people now and how they listen better and how they, wait and how they support but don't fill in. And I think, so much of that is a model of that if we can teach families and friends how to not leave them out of the conversation that so I love the stuff you're doing with inclusion and keep doing that.
It's so important because that's what the families tell me they need. And
Absolutely.
uh, so let's talk a little bit about life participation approach. I'm a big fan, love it. I've always
Yes.
been like a functional therapist, but it wasn't until I really heard about life participation approach that I'm like, Oh my gosh. And I attended Aphasia Access for the first time last year. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm in a room full of like-minded people. And
Minded.
it's like, I just got chills. It's like coming home, when you work so
Yes.
hard professionally and to really be with people who get it, who are there for the same purpose with the same mission. Can you talk about a
Yeah.
little bit about since you were one of the founding members of Aphasia Access? I've talked about them before on the podcast, but can you give us a little
Yeah.
background and what is the life participation approach?
Sure. So I think that the one part of the definition of life participation approach that really hits me is that it's consumer driven, and it is until the person or family no longer elects to have support. It doesn't mean no longer accept, wants therapy, because most people would want therapy for the rest of their lives. But I will say that, like you, I was doing this functional therapy. I was in my, little office in hospitals and rehab centers where I was working and worrying that I was doing something wrong. Like, I'm having a conversation. I'm teaching them how to have a conversation with their grandchild. I'm teaching them to volunteer again and how to do that. And I felt guilty. Like, should I be doing drill like all the time? And while I see, of course, a need for impairment based programming for certain things, it is the ultimate goal for people to be able to engage in communication in ways that keep them in their life. And so when I first heard of life participation approach, I really felt validated. I felt, wow, these are my people, the people that believe in this. And Roberta Ellman, who is one of the authors, became my mentor and really helped me develop my guts in quitting my job and starting TAP, because it felt so necessary and directed for me to offer that on a bigger scale. But my therapy, I think, was always like that. I wasn't sure that it was supposed to be. And so I think that life participation is using the things and pieces of a person's life to think that life is therapy. Therapy is not life. If somebody tells you we have no more insurance and I'm not going to be able to see, them, most therapists will say something like, you've made as much progress as you're going to make. They're not saying that because it's true. They may be saying that because they don't know what else to say, because the insurance company has dictated. So instead, really empowering the person to say, hey, this is your journey. Let's look at some of the things that you love doing, that you might want to return to, that you haven't done since your stroke. And let's integrate that language therapy into that. So my mom, for example, was, a big volunteer, and she was a nurse before. But she loved volunteering. She read to the blind. So I had her read to my son's kindergarten class. And then she did so well with that. She loved, hanging out with other women lectors and people that were in the church. So we had her be involved in a group that made rosaries. So it was some good work for her right hand, but it also allowed her opportunities to communicate. So I think it's finding, out who the person is, what their goals are, working with it together, and then designing the program with a hierarchy of how much support do you need to return to that. And then when you're on your own, a lot of generalization happens to the other areas the person wants.
I want to touch on another topic that comes up a lot, and especially in the chronic aphasia space, is about
Sure.
identity.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about maybe what it was like for your mom, and how she coped with that, having been a nurse, having been a volunteer, and then losing her voice and having to get back? What could you give us a little insight, you being who you are and what you've done professionally, and just having that heart and that care for your mom and living it every day with her?
Yeah. I mean, I think the hardest part was watching her switch roles. And when you talk about identity, I love the work that Deborah Meyerson and Steve Zuckerman has done on identity theft and, really having us focus on the emotional toll and the need to have grief. My mother's generation was not the kind that sought out help or counseling. And so when I saw her in this new role of, instead of taking care of someone, she was being taken care of. I think that is the overriding, marquee statement when you're talking about identity is roles. What made up your life? Who are you to other people, to your, the organizations that you belong to, and to your family? So one of the things I think that we tried really hard to do is focus on hierarchies. Again, really, always drawing those steps and saying, okay, mom, you want to do your own pills, of course. She put her pills in the pill container. But because of the aphasia, we're going to stand by and watch, and help out, and only giving her the help that she absolutely needed so that she could have that independence. But in terms of the identity and roles, getting her back involved in volunteering. When she went to assisted living, I would speak with the recreation therapist and say, my mom loved to throw parties. Can you make her like your assistant? So happy to know that. Every time they did a little party at the assisted living place, they would go get her and she'd help decorate, and it filled her cup. And finally, it was more personal stuff. Is I would talk to my siblings and my nieces and nephews and my own children and say, before mom had her stroke, you used to go to her with questions. You talk to her, about your plans. And now you sit and look at her and don't know how to not communicate with her, but they didn't want it to be a burden for her. They didn't want to share. And it's really important that people say they still want to hear your stories. You aren't going to make them feel bad by telling them. So oftentimes I would share a teenage angst story while raising my boys, and I'd say, "What do you think I should do, mom?" And it I could see it in her face, is oh, she still needs
That's
me
right.
to be that. And I think oftentimes, especially if it's like a spouse, the spouse takes over all those initial roles because they have
That's right.
to. But it's so vital that those are given back and the person is included in every decision that they would have been made involved in before, because it's not their intellect, it's their
That's
language.
right. That's right. There is a way. There's a way to
Yeah.
get.
There's always a
There's
way.
always a way. Find a way or make one. I
Yeah. Love
I
it.
just think it's so amazing to have you in this role. You are such an advocate, so
Oh my God. Thank
knowledgeable.
you.
It's really inspiring, and it keeps those of us out here in the trenches doing the things, trying to help people who maybe are out of insurance or have lost faith in rehabilitation. And there's a lot of that out there too. Like, why am I working on this particular thing? I can't talk. And what do you mean you're discharging me? I
Right?
can't talk. I can't go back to work. I can't make a phone call, whatever the case may be. So we still have more work to do. Educate, I think, speech pathologists in general, community. Get the community to understand what is aphasia and how can they help. And you don't have to speak louder to get your message across to the person with aphasia. There are times, I'm sure you would say,
Sure.
sure, that some are legitimately hard of hearing, but for the most part, that's not a good strategy.
And I would like to add from that, it, it is such an honor, by the way, for me to be in this role. I pinch myself every morning that, I get to do this, but we have a lot of work to do. We have established a very transactional role over the past few years without an executive director. The NAA hasn't had an executive director in 9 years.
Whoa,
So, yeah. So there was a lot of things being done by really helpful people and volunteers and the board, but it had, it's not supposed to be the big, elephant behind the screen. It is supposed to be the connector, and you all, the people that are doing things out in the community, we are making a commitment to you all that we're going to do a lot better. Our provider network will get better. Our referrals will be better. Our spotlight will be better. We're starting a special group called NAA Community Connectors. So instead of being what we called an affiliate, and when we were always asking affiliates to do stuff for us, we're going to say, what can we do for you? Because you all, in the people in the trenches, I was there,
Mhm.
I was there.
Absolutely.
And now I want to take that spotlight and shine it on what everybody's doing and find really accessible ways to share that information across. So please know that we have a commitment, a really strong commitment to shine the light on you all and all the work you guys are doing.
I think that's amazing. And I know that families are going to be happy to hear it because it's bridging that gap between
Yeah.
perceived corporation and the day to day lives that they're living.
Absolutely. And we're people. And because I've had the experience, the gift from my mother, what I can, how I can empathize with a family, instead of just a family reaching out and putting a question on answers at, I say, do you want to jump on a Zoom call? You want to check in? What can I do? I want to hear more about your stories. And the payoff of it is just them feeling less alone, us feeling more connected. It sounds very idealistic, and maybe that's been always my problem, is I've always saw like we could do this, bringing the cheerleader role back.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I feel like we are in a great position to change the way people see organizations that are there to provide data, research, all those things, but also to provide connection. And so, yeah.
Super neat. Now, we're going to wrap this up, but I believe you had a
Of course.
question and answer session last night. Is
We did. We do an Ask the Expert at the NAA every month, and talking about all of the questions that people have, like, does music therapy help, and how does, medicine involved in the aphasia recovery? Tell me about PPA. And so what we did for June was we did an Ask the Expert that was frequently asked questions. And I took all of these questions that I get every day in our answers and wow, there were some themes.
interesting.
And it really highlighted the fact that there were a lot of things that are still holes for people. They just don't have that information. So, unless they're connected with an aphasia center, an aphasia program, sometimes they don't have the answers. And so, we did pull together a lot of questions. A lot of them were on mental health, mood. A lot of them were on, participation and how do I talk to my speech therapist about what I need in therapy. And then a lot of them were about PPA and other types of aphasia. And so we have a second one scheduled during our PPA chats at the end of June that's specific to PPA. And I'm really excited about that one because even across the country, across the world, all of the people that have been recently diagnosed and out in the media has served to, yes, bring more awareness of aphasia, but yes, add a lot of confusion to the term. And so it is our job to really educate people that there is a difference between stroke induced aphasia, brain injuries, and issues of neurodegenerative disease processes, and all the symptoms that go along with that. So while we enjoy great collaborations with AFTD and American Stroke Association, it's our job to talk aphasia, and we're going to do a lot better job at that.
I
So
love it. It is
keep looking at our website and you'll find out what's going on.
absolutely. So, is the replay available of the question and answer from last night?
It will be today. It was just done last night, so I'm sure Catherine is working hard at that. And the one thing I've been very impressed with at the NAA that I never really took advantage of when I was in the trenches myself is our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel has little educational videos. It has they have different playlists, and one of the playlists is Ask the Expert, and you can search which experts we've talked to, what topics we've covered. So definitely go there for some of that information. and then sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter has changed totally. Our website is changing to be less about blog posts and stories and more about evergreen, information that people need. So up on the top right corner of our website, you'll see under resources, it has a section for sign up for our newsletter. We'd love people to sign up so that they know what's going on, every week.
Terrific. Well, your YouTube channel is great. I was on there a few days
Great.
ago poking around. There's a lot of great information on there. And I think sometimes we just need to help, again, bridge that gap with technology and empower families to here's a resource. Go watch it. Here's the link. Just click on this link and start there.
Yes.
Just got to put one foot forward first.
Yeah.
Maura, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule
Thank
to
you.
join us today, telling us about Aphasia Awareness Month, your personal journey with your mom with aphasia, and how that has impacted you as a clinician, and all of your initiatives that you've done. I believe you were truly a cheerleader before your mom had her stroke, right? Because once you have that enthusiasm kind of never goes away, just gets
Yeah.
amplified, just like your theme. And we look forward to seeing how the Aphasia Association can continue to support individuals and families as they go through this journey.
Well, you have my commitment. We'll do the best we can, and we're going to do it as a team together. So we're never alone. You're never alone. So thank you so much for having
Thank you
me. It
so
was
much.
great talking to you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.